Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ICSGS, Universitas Indonesia, Jakarta. We proudly present the second ICSGS 2018 International Conference on Stratejik and Global Studies, and we are now in the last day of the event. It's such an honor for me, Lina Razurga, to be able to stand in here and welcome all of you in the last day of the second ICSGS 2018 International Conference on Stratejik and Global Studies. In these 3 days, we are having plenty of opportunities to discuss and share knowledges and insights in this conference. Please take your time. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the agenda today, I would like to welcome the Excellency Director of School of Stratejik and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Muhammad Lutfi Zudi, the Honorable Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman from University of Ankara and Editor-in-Chief of Inside Turkey Journal, Dr. Indonesia, the Honorable Dr. Muhammad Shokila, Head of Terrorism Studies Major, School of Stratejik and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia, the Honorable Dr. Shahroni Rofi'i, the Lecturer of Middle East and Islamic Studies, School of Stratejik and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia, and the Honorable all presenters and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to our main program, our last plenary session, who will be led by our moderator, Dr. Muhammad Shokila. Without further ado, please join me for welcoming Dr. Muhammad Shokila as our moderator today. Please give a round of applause. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our speakers for the plenary session. Our speaker is Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman. Please give a warm applause.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming the last session. Beside me, Professor Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman. He is the International Relations Director of SETA Foundation. You know, SETA Foundation is one of the best think tank in Turkey, I think now, because SETA journal very influence for Middle East study, not for in Turkey but in Egypt, I think, and overall in Middle East. We today in the last session we'll talk about handling national priorities, addressing global and regional issues. Turkish foreign policy during the AKP rule party with the issue sustainable development. We know that 29 October, the third airport will be opened by President Erdogan, and then Atatürk Airport will be moved to the third airport. I think it's very important because Turkish government claim that the third airport is the biggest airport in the world. I think it's important for Turkey for empowering economy and then sustainable development. And then in the first of decade ruling AKP ruling party, they are from Altyapı infrastructure project, like Jokowi did today. And then for the several weeks ago, we know that Jamal Khashoggi, but unfortunately we didn't discuss about Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington journalist, was killed by person affiliated to, sorry for the, I must mention, intelligent rank affiliated to Arab Saudi intelligent rank. Today we discuss about Turkish foreign policy during AKP party rule, because until now AK party still govern Turkey, and Erdogan lead Turkey today, and we have 35 minutes for discussion, maybe 20 minutes for presentation, and the rest for the question and answer session. Please give applause to Professor Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman. Yes.
Hello everybody. It's a pleasure for me, it's a great honor for me to be here in Indonesia and at the University of Indonesia. This is the first time that I have been in the country, thanks to Dr. Muhammad Shakila for his invitation, and for the Congress administrators. Thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity to address the most recent developments in both domestic politics and foreign policy of Turkey. Today I will try to focus on mainly foreign policy of Turkey, but we all know that domestic developments significantly influence foreign policy orientation of any given country. So Turkey is no exception. Therefore, while trying to analyze Turkish foreign policy, for sure I will somehow relate these issues to the domestic politics of Turkey. So you will change? Okay. Now I just, the first window, as you see, I try to analyze Turkish foreign policy or changes in Turkish foreign policy under 7 titles. These are, to me, the main focus of changes in Turkish both domestic and foreign policies. As you see, normalization, rationalization, nationalization. I will try to explain each these titles, subtitles in detail. Can we change to the other? Yeah. By normalization, I mean we have been experiencing a dramatic return to history in Turkey. That is, after the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1923, Turkey was established a republican, but later on, for decades following the declaration of the republic, Turkey chose a totally Western-oriented policy, both in domestic and in its foreign policy. That is, Turkey considers itself not as a non-Western country, but as a Western one. And this Western-oriented understanding was officially recognized with the Turkish entrance into almost all Western institutions, including NATO, including the Council of Europe, including the European Union, OECD, etc. So Turkey, since then, after the Second World War, Turkey is part of almost all Western institutions. And they crafted the leadership, crafted Turkey as declared Turkey as a secular republic. That is, they deny their heritage. That is, they returned its back to the eastern part of the world, even to its own history. That is, they denied the heritage of the Ottoman state for decades. Okay, when we talk about this normalization, first, the AK Party rule began to make a peace with its civilizational, historical, and cultural heritage. That is, it began to recognize the geography that it used to control for decades, including today's countries in the Balkans, in the Middle East, and in the north part of Africa. That is, Turkey began to diversify its foreign policy to other parts of the world. But at the same time, it initiated some opening inside of the domestic politics, culturally, socially, politically, economically, and we name this as democratization of the nation state. How? By recognition of ethnic and cultural groups in the country. Until AK Party rule, for instance, the largest minority in Turkey, the Kurds, their existence was denied. So it was prohibited even to use the word Kurd or Kurdistan in Turkey. The AK Party government initiated a reform process, an opening towards the Kurds. It now recognized their existence. They recognize many cultural rights to the Kurds. Today, we have a TV station, a state-run TV station, the name of TRT Kurd. That is, TRT is the name of the state institution dealing with TV and radio stations. So we have a special station run by the state for the Kurds. And the Kurdish language began to be taught even in primary schools, at the universities. Kurdish literature and culture began to be taught at the universities. They publish, even the state publishes books in Kurdish. So there is a large opening. And another example is the Alevites. You know, the Alevites is a special cultural group similar to Shias, a part of the Shia world. Until very recently, their existence was also denied. Some of the cultural associations were opened in 1980s, but it was the AK Party who, again, initiated an opening towards the Alevites. Now they enjoy to run their own cultural and religious centers nationwide. So they are almost everywhere. And as I've said, we name this as a democratization of the nation state. That is not only Muslims in Turkey, even non-Muslims, especially traditional Christian minorities, they enjoy more rights than they used to during the previous governments. And the role, therefore, at the end, the role of public opinion, the role of cultural and ethnic groups increased dramatically in Turkish politics. The government began to improve its relations with all. As I have given just two examples. By definition, the government decided that there is no enemy of Turkey, no given enemy of Turkey. Until very recently, Turkey was defined, geographically and politically was defined, a country encircled by enemies. But now, it refuses this idea. Until very recently, especially the Greeks, the Armenians, Russians, even the Arabs, they used to be considered as enemies, but nowadays, Turkey tries to improve its relations with all these actors, including Armenia, Greece. Maybe you all know that maybe the warmest Turkish-Russian relations has been experienced nowadays. There is a very close relationship between Turkey and Russia. So there is no exclusion of any international actor in Turkish foreign policy. It has been following an inclusive understanding and orientation. The second title is Rationalization of Foreign Policy. Why I have said rationalization? Because until very recently, Turkish foreign policy and domestic politics was ideological, very, very ideological. Rationalization means focusing on the national interest, the interest of the people of Turkey. They began to follow a more pragmatic foreign policy. At the end, the AK Party government compartmentalized its foreign relations. That is, they refuse to follow a holistic approach, that is a totalistic approach towards any international actor. They compartmentalize, that is, they begin to follow issue by issue. I can give you some examples. For instance, we still have a very tense relationship with the Sisi government in Egypt. But Turkey never stopped exporting goods to Egypt. After the first year of the military coup, Turkey was number 5 in terms of exporting goods to Egypt. Or the Israeli state. You may also know that we have a tense relationship with Israel, but still Israelis, they visit Turkey as tourists, and Turkey still exports goods to the Israeli state. So we do not put all eggs in one basket, let's say. We begin to divide. That's why I try to name this as compartmentalization or developing a sectoral perspective in Turkish foreign policy. Today, we have many problems with Western countries, in particular the United States, but still there are too many other areas that we continue to cooperate with the United States. You know, we have, on the one hand, we have some conflictual issues, but on the other, we have some cooperative issues that we have been dealing with the United States. The government of Turkey, for the last 2 decades, desecuritized almost all economic, political, cultural issues in the country. Until very recently, almost everything going on in domestic politics and in foreign policy was securitized. Therefore, the military was the main actor in Turkish domestic and foreign policy. Nowadays, it's not those who are appointed, but those who are elected by the people. They are the dominant power in Turkey. So we witness the end of a tautology, a bureaucratic tautology in Turkey. So it all started with the securitization of all issues. I will give you again 2 examples. For instance, wearing a hijab, a headscarf, in Turkey was a security issue until a decade ago. It was prohibited, for instance, to wear hijab in governmental institutions. But nowadays, we have women wearing hijab not only in civilian institutions, but even in the military and security forces, in police forces. So it's not a security issue anymore. Or speaking Kurdish was a security issue. Until very recently, But I have just mentioned a little bit earlier, now the state-run TV stations publish in Kurdish. That is, speaking Kurdish is not a security issue anymore. And we have hundreds of similar issues that are desecuritized in Turkey. So, even in foreign policy, the Turkish relations in the context of NATO was the most important one. That is, it was militarized in one sense. So, the Turkish foreign policy was run mainly by military officers in the context of NATO. We were considering ourselves as the second strongest army in NATO. So everything was run, almost everything was run in this context. Nowadays, NATO is only one of the parameters of Turkish foreign policy, not the main one. The last point that you see on the screen, the focus on national interest, creation of an Ankara-centered regional, both political and economic orders. So this is the demand of the current Turkish government. It's not the Brussels center or Washington center, it's now Ankara center. As a continuation of this, the Turkish government, the current Turkish government leadership began to diversify and integrate the Turkish economy with the world economy. Why it's important? It's part of the desecuritization process. You know, economy was a detail in Turkish foreign policy until very recently, unfortunately. But now it's at the heart of Turkish foreign policy. At the heart of Turkish foreign policy. It's the most significant parameter of Turkish foreign policy. As a precondition, the Turkish government tried to integrate the Turkish economy with the world economy, and it began to prioritize economic development. Dr. Mohammed gave just an example. After next week, we will open the third airport in Istanbul, one of the biggest, if it's not the biggest, in the world. But we have too many great projects going on in Turkey. I think if you make a list of grant projects today run in the world, probably there will be more than 15 projects in the first 50 in the world. So there are too many projects going on. The Turkish companies begin to follow a global policy. So the Turkish companies nowadays, they are all over the world, in China, in Central Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. I don't know how many Turkish companies running their business here in Indonesia, but I know that there is an opening to Central Asia, to Southeast Asia as well. Yes, please. To the So the third title is Nationalization of Foreign Policy. What I mean by nationalization is the Turkish government began to follow a more independent foreign policy. This is to be independent or to initiate a process of self-administration, self-government, a real self-determination. In international relations, we divide the concept of self-determination into two parameters. On the one hand, there are two dimensions of self-determination. We have an external self-determination and we have an internal one. External self-determination is to be politically independent against other states. But internal self-determination requires democratic consolidation. That is to run all business, all relations based the capital centered. That is Ankara centered. In this sense, the current government introduced new foreign policy actors in Turkey. Traditionally we had two main actors, foreign ministry and the army, the armed forces, as I have mentioned a little bit earlier. But nowadays we have too many alternative actors running foreign policy issues in the name of Turkey. We have TİKA, for instance, Turkish Cooperation Agency. Its activities is all over the world. They are active in more than 100 countries, mainly providing humanitarian and developmental aid to the partners, economic and political partners. We have YTB, as we call it in Turkey, a newly established institution providing scholarships to students worldwide. They bring yearly more than 4,000 students to Turkey, and we have Yunus Emre Institute, for instance, trying to improve Turkey's cultural diplomacy with its partners. And we have many other actors. That is many formal and informal actors. They began to participate in directly or indirectly in the decision-making process in Turkey. We have many NGOs running activities all over the world, especially in the African continent. Turkey, for the sake of an independent foreign policy, Turkey began to improve its defense systems. Until very recently, Turkey was almost totally dependent on its Western allies. It was dependent on the United States military and weapons systems. Now, Turkey has been providing more than 60% of its military procurement by itself. So Turkey began to produce its own helicopters, its own jet fighters, tanks. As a matter of fact, Turkey has been in process to develop Kaplan tanks. 2 minutes? Oh, sorry. Even with Indonesia, so national procurement increased quite a lot. Popularization of foreign policy issues, I have mentioned this, democratization, then we'll go to another one. So we have 4 to go. Taking initiative foreign policy. Turkey was a reactionary state until very recently. It was not taking initiatives. But now it began to follow a proactive and high-profile foreign policy. It initiated mediation processes between different regional actors, between the Israelis, for instance, and the Syrian states, between the Lebanese groups, the Iraqi groups. Even it attempted to mediate between India and Pakistan, etc. So it began to take initiatives to mediate between different international actors. In 2010, Turkey with Brazil mediated between Iran and Western powers. Unfortunately, with when the Westerners they reject the deal, so Iran was ready to accept all the conditions, but it was refused by the Western countries. Turkey began to establish military bases. Now Turkey has a military base in Qatar and one in Somalia. It's in the process of having one in Sudan. Turkey began to take initiative to take military operations in Iraq and Syria. Turkey have several military bases in both of these countries in order to be able to struggle against terrorism. Yes, please. I have mentioned the new openings. Turkey now as a middle power, as an effective international actor, it began to initiate new relations in new subjects, new topics, with new partners. So the scope and the partners of Turkey expanded quite a lot. Turkey has been trying to establish an interdependent network with all of its partners. We don't follow a zero-sum relationship. Turkey has been trying to develop a win-win strategy with all of its actors. So we consider ourselves as Turkey as an equal partner even with the smallest one. Let's say Turkey considers itself as an equal partner with Qatar, with other small countries, with Oman, with Kuwait, etc. By the way, can we go back? Turkey now is number 5 in terms of having the most foreign representatives in the world. This shows us diversification and globalization of Turkish foreign policy. Therefore, we consider Turkey now as a global actor because of this number. And another one other indication: Turkish Airlines now flies to the most points in the world among all other national or private airlines. Yes, please. But at the same time, we try to focus. Can you give me several minutes to finish? I have 2 more pages. The regional focus in foreign policy. Turkey now, as you all know, that very active in the Middle East. Turkey is the main player, one of the main players in the Syrian crisis. You know, it has been supporting the Syrian opposition since the beginning. Now, a certain part of the Syrian territory is under the control of Turkey and Turkey-backed Syrian oppositions. Turkey initiated 2 military operations. During the first operation, they get rid of Daesh in the northern part of Syria. The second operation was directed against PKK-affiliated groups in Syria. And now Turkey gave up these regions to the control of the Syrian opposition. And the last move, Turkey persuaded Russia to take control of the Idlib province. You know, it was about, unfortunately, to suffer a humanitarian disaster. So the Syrian regime, backed by the Iranians, they were about to attack the civilians. There are more than 2 million civilians living in the Idlib province, and Turkey now has 12 military points, small bases, and they have been protecting civilians against the possible Assad regime attacks in Syria. Turkey has been following a supra-sectarian policy in Turkey, in the Middle East, sorry. Turkey has been following a supra-sectarian policy in the Middle East. That is, Turkey, as a secular state, tried to include all groups in the Middle East. Turkey does not want the otherization of either a Sunni state or a Shia state. Turkey doesn't want the Israeli state to be excluded from the regional politics. Yes, it's true. We have a tense relationship with the Israeli state, but we want the Israeli state and all other states to be normalized. That is to pursue a policy under the rules of the principles of international law. So we demand all other actors to follow a policy according to the rules set up by the United Nations and other international platforms. That's why I put there normalization of regional states, including the Israeli state and the Gulf monarchies. As you have just heard from Dr. Mohammed, the Saudi Arabian intelligence or state apparatus, they have killed an innocent civilian intellectual in the consulate in Turkey. So it's part of this abnormal, that is exceptional position they think for themselves. The Gulf, they are not bound by any rules. The Israeli state, as you know, for the last 7 decades, they do not themselves bound themselves with the international rules. Yes, we'll come to the last. Okay, Turkey for the last decade, it began to follow a global policy. Turkey began to represent global political opposition against the current system, which is not functioning well, unfortunately. We all know that the United Nations lost its ability, capability to solve international crises. The United States couldn't prevent the genocide in Bosnia, the genocide in Rwanda. Nowadays, the United Nations is unable to stop the killings, mass killings in Syria and in Yemen, for instance. Therefore, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan chants the slogan, "The world is bigger than 5." That is the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Turkey calls a large and comprehensive reform for the United Nations and for the world system. Overall, Turkey has been trying to improve, especially a concept to be dominated in world politics, which is justice. Turkey believes that there is no justice in the world system. So we need to support the poor, the South, the underrepresented groups, whoever they are, in the world system. Therefore, Turkey has been hosting the summit of the least developed countries in Turkey, in Istanbul. For the last decades, 2 summits were held in Istanbul. Turkey initiated a joint summit between Turkey and all African countries, for instance. 3 different summits were held so far, 1 in Turkey and 1 in Africa. Yes, we'll come to the last. At the end,
maybe we
I will just finish.
we will continue after Jumat.
Okay, continue.
Yes.
But I may not want to hold this anymore.
Because this time for
In 1 minute, I will finish.
Yes, okay.
A new political system is in the making in Turkey. It's the end of the bureaucratic tutelage. We came to the end. Turkey began to redefine its state identity and national interest. So there is a comprehensive transformation with the AK Party rule. Turkey has been trying to develop an Ankara-centered foreign policy, and this is it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.
From Mr. Ataman present, I underline how Turkey transformed from Ottoman era to Republic era, and then from Republic era to AKP government. I think we just finished the presentation, but after Jumat we will continue with the question and answer, because we must the Muslim. Please give applause to Professor Akmal. I will send back to MC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman and also Dr. Muhammad Syakila. We will continue the question and answer session after the lunch break and also the Jumat prayer. The food stall is on the back side of the room. We will continue the question and answer session at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, now we open session Q&A. I will give 3 questions. We just have 35 minutes because after this session we will discuss about Turkey against terrorism. Right? Interesting issue. Yes, please, Miss Tema, and then Sawa and back. Tema, Sawa, satu lagi. Next question. Okay, Miss Tema, please.
Sini dulu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Professor Mahiti. Thank you very much for the lecture. Welcome to Indonesia. Welcome to University of Indonesia. Host building is Hojang. My name is Emma from Faculty of Humanities. I'd like to ask you some questions, if you are pleased. So, for what you have delivered before Jumat praying, is it your opinion as a scholar or academician, or it is the voice of a party as a ruling party? And the second is, speaking about security issues, is veto a security issue? Veto legal and so your explanation is very appreciated. And third, is it right that the relation between Ankara and DC is like love and hate relationship between Turkey and the States? I mean, going to the fact that the American preacher finally freed and sent back to the States, but the States until now doesn't want to send back Fethullah Gulen, and he's now still in Pennsylvania. So, what do you think? How far is political bargaining Turkey toward United Nations? And the last, probably this is secret, my question, I hope you don't mind. How is Ahmad Davutoglu now? He seemed to be disappear from political life in Turkey, knowing that he used to be the Prime Minister. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Merhaba, Ataman Hojam. Actually, I have 3 questions for you. As we know, Turkey has become the largest refugee recipient country in the last 7 years. And I have researched about closed-door policy Turkey toward Syrian refugees. And I want to ask, as an academic, what do you think about that policy? Closed-door policy, I mean. And is there a benefit for the government regarding the policy, and which categorization does closed-door policy belong to? In your presentation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. I'll try to go one by one. I have spoken as an academician. official link with AK Party. Yes. Even though the think tank that I work for is close to AK Party, I mean in its perspective, political perspective, but I don't have any official link with the party. That was my personal reading of Turkish politics. The second question is that a security issue in Turkey? Yes, as a matter of fact, it is. For decades, many people, they know this organization as a so-called Islamic one. So it was in disguise, unfortunately. At the end, when we have realized that, as we call it in Turkey, they have established a parallel state inside of the state. So they were mainly consisting the backbone of the security forces, the army, the police officers, almost half of all Turkish judges, they were from this organization. And they began to not to respect any established rules, traditions, the constitution, etc. So there was too many illegalities going on. And 2 years ago, as you also probably know, that there was a coup attempt against an elected government. It was the people of Turkey, not President Tayyip Erdogan himself. Yes, he led the people, but it was the people, and many people, even before his call, they took the streets and they stood against this military coup. Unfortunately, more than 250 individuals were killed by Gülenist coup plotters. I was in Ankara, and some of my friends, unfortunately, they got killed. More than 2,000 people, they got injured. Maybe you have seen on TVs that people, they were laying in front of tanks. So it was a kind of the most important, the ultimate friction between FETÖ and not the government. All institutions of Turkey and the majority of people, more than 95% of Turkish people, whether they are secular or religious, whether they are leftist or rightist, now they consider FETÖ as a terrorist organization, as one of the biggest threats to the security of Turkey. And as you have asked in a question, all high-ranking FETÖ members, nowadays they live in the United States. You know, the mastermind of the coup attempt lives in Pennsylvania. Many other army officers, generals, more than 400 generals, they now live in Germany, in the United States, and in the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, in spite of many international agreements, they do not extradite deport this to Turkey. So they continue to live freely in those countries. We don't have a love and hate relationship with the United States. Nowadays, we have only a tense and hate relationship, unfortunately. Even though we are allies, mainly this is because of changed perception of Turkey in the United States, unfortunately. They used to look us as a NATO member, as a NATO ally. Recently, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Turkish perception of in the United States has changed. They do not consider Turkey as a regional ally anymore. Nowadays, as you know, that they have been working with the United Arab Emirates, they have been working with Saudi Arabia and some other countries, for sure the Israeli state. So they began to work with some anti-Turkish forces in the region. And those who are interested know well, they have been supporting PKK for the last several years, unfortunately. They give, so far they have sent more than 2,000 trucks full of weapons, even tanks, heavy weapons to PKK. And they still continue to do this. They have been supporting PKK in Syria. That's why it was a kind of red line for any other negotiations. As long as the United States support FETÖ and support PKK, there is no room, unfortunately, to improve bilateral relations. Yes, we continue, as I've said, we think in compartmentalized manner, in a sectoral manner. We continue to cooperate with the United States in their struggle against terrorism, for instance. As a NATO member, we have sent even troops to Afghanistan, to Somalia, to Libya, to many other places, as an indication of working together, working together with the United States. But overall, the Western perception of Turkey is quite negative nowadays. In the United States, we have a negative picture, slightly less compared with the United States, but still we are trying to manage it, with the exception of the United Kingdom, by the way. The United Kingdom is the only country which accepts FETÖ was behind the military coup, and they were the only one who stood next to the Turkish government against this coup attempt. So it was the only Western country supported Turkey. It will take a longer time, unfortunately, to stabilize these relations, but good days of the old will never come back, it seems. You know, we are the closest to the United States, so we don't know. The bargain, the negotiations are still continue for the extradition of Fethullah Gülen, and we have two bureaucrats arrested in the United States. So we ask the United States to free them. So we have some concrete and long-term problems, unfortunately. When it comes to Davutoğlu lives still in Ankara. He is there. He has published several books in the last 2 years after he left the prime ministry. He translated some of his books from English to Turkish. So nowadays he has a kind of large collection of books about the most recent developments in Turkey. He has his own circle of intellectuals, advisors, so he continued to work with them. He was the main person working for a think tank based in Istanbul, BİSAS, Dr. Muhammad also knows that. He has been contributing to a university, a private university, Istanbul Şehir University, City University of Istanbul. So he is active. He is indirectly active in politics, not directly, but he is there. About the closed door policy, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, it's related to all the open door and closed door policy of refugees. It's related to all factors that I have mentioned. You know, Turkey, in the early years of the Syrian uprising, civil war, opened the door to everybody. So the ultimate goal was to save any individual, irrelevant of its ethnicity, its religious background, etc., etc. So Turkey accepts everybody who knocks the door, okay? So it opened its border to everybody coming from Syria and Iraq, by the way, including PKK members, which is considered as a terrorist organization by the Turkish government. At the end, you know, we have now more than 3.5 million refugees in Turkey. But later on, Western countries, they began to initiate a campaign, a political campaign against Turkey, that it has been supporting
ISIS, Daesh. This was not the case. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when you open the door to everybody, probably everybody will come in, including Daesh sympathizers, PKK sympathizers, everybody. But later on, unfortunately, we began to close the door. So it was unmanageable for us for two things. You know, we have our own political and economic problems, and we have a negative perception of Turkey in the West because of this open door policy. So the Turkish government has decided to build a wall between Turkey and Syria in order to be able to control this flow of people. Now, there is no mass entrance, but there are still entrances. 2 days ago, the Turkish security forces saved a Japanese journalist, for instance, in Syria, and they sent it to Japan. So it was a nice gesture between the two countries. The Turkish security forces now they are in Syria, inside of Syria. They are trying to control the border, not on one side, on both sides of the border. And we have a European dimension as well. You know, European countries, they are really afraid of immigration to Europe. And Turkey is considered as a kind of back door between the Eastern world and the European countries. By the way, Syria is not one of the sources, it's not the only source, it's one of the sources. Nowadays, for instance, the second largest immigration is from Afghanistan. Every day, thousands of Afghans, through Iran, they enter Turkey and they are trying to go to Europe. So nowadays, still there are some illegal migration going on, but compared with several years ago, it's quite less. It's about Turkey's relations with the West, with other actors, but at the same time, it's about the Turkish domestic politics.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ataman. We open one question.
Thank you very much. I'm Nano from University. I should say thank you very much for your presentation. And we know that Turkey and Indonesian Defense Ministry has joint cooperation to build the medium tanks. But that's not my question. My question is after the event of the in Turkey itself, what my colleague asking about the many officers has catch up and go out from the Turkish, and how about the civil military relation in Turkey now, and also about the role of the armed forces in internal security. I think that's all my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Two significant questions. The first one about the civil-military relations. Before the Jumat prayer, I have mentioned that we used to have a dominant position of the military in Turkish politics. They were the main carrier, the main executor of Turkish foreign policy. Not one main reason was the securitization almost of everything inside of Turkey and its foreign policy. NATO was the most significant framework in which the Turkish foreign policy was executed. But now I can easily say that nowadays
this dominance, this tutelage is absent. That is, this military dominance was abolished during the AK Party period. For now, they have a less say, a less significant role in Turkish politics. I will give you just 2 examples. You know, Turkey initiated 2 military operations beyond the Turkish-Syrian border, inside of Syria. One operation was against Daesh, the other one was against PKK. These 2 operations were forced by the president. The military was reluctant to initiate this military operation, to carry on. They were quite pro-status quo. So it was the political will which dominated in these 2 operations. And still it's the political will that influenced the main or determines Turkish domestic and foreign policy of Turkey. And then, therefore, the role of the military compared with the previous decades is somehow at a secondary role. You know, the structure of the Turkish Security Council was changed. In the past, it was dominated by the military. Now it's dominated by the civilians. Second, in state protocol hierarchy, the chief of staff was number 4 in Turkey. It was the president, the president of the parliament, prime minister, and then it was the chief of staff. Now we don't have a prime minister anymore, since we have experienced a change in the administrative political system of Turkey. Now we have a presidential system. So we have president, we have president of the parliament, we have many other ministers, then we come the chief of staff. So even officially, in the hierarchical structure, it's in lower ranks compared with the previous era. Additionally, you know, the security forces, we call it gendarmerie. You know, they are affiliated with the foreign, not with the interior ministry, the Ministry of Interior, and the guards. You know, Turkey is encircled 3 sides of Turkey with the sea. So the maritime guards also are now affiliated with the Ministry of Interior. That is, we have divided the security forces into 2. One affiliated with the Ministry of Defense, and we have some other part affiliated with the Ministry of Interior. So there are many other things that I can talk about, but at the end I can say that the military has lost its role. It's not a determinant of Turkish politics anymore. They are now functioning more in technical matters, not in political one, by the way, similar to the European countries and the United States.
Thank you. Okay, so 1-2 minutes for the closing remarks. One thing to say, one of the reasons that why Turkey and Western countries, especially the United States, have tense relationship, I want to elaborate a little bit on this point. Mainly it's because of the Turkish demand for further independence. Unfortunately, Western countries, they do not want independent countries. Many Europeans, Western politicians, academicians, they clearly told us, they tell us that you don't listen to us anymore. So, and they say, you must.
This is not the case only for Turkey, but the Turkish state continues to remain independent. It will continue to play an independent role with the Westerners and with others. So we want a kind of horizontal relationship both with the West and non-Western countries. But we will not accept a hierarchical relationship with the West anymore. So this is one of the main sources of many problems that we have been experiencing with the Western countries. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Ataman. I don't want to summarize your presentation, but give applause to Professor. I give it back to MC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhyiddin Ataman and also Dr. Muhammad Shakila. The next session will be the second presentation, still with Dr. Muhyiddin Ataman, and it's about terrorism, and it will be moderated by Mr. Garnadi Walanda, a student of Terrorism Studies, Universitas Indonesia. Please welcome. Give a warm applause, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Once again, welcome to Jakarta, Professor Ataman. Okay, after the discussion previously with Pak Muhammad Shakila, now we will have a discussion about the strategy of Turkey to fight against terrorism. If I may explain and describe again about Professor Ataman's profile for those who just came to this place, and welcome again to everyone. Professor Muhyiddin Ataman graduated from the Faculty of Political Science in the Department of International Relations at Ankara University. He earned his Master of Art degree at Central Oklahoma University and Doctor of Philosophy at University of Kentucky, completed in 1999. Professor Ataman is currently the faculty member at the Faculty of Political Science at University, Social Science University of Ankara. Okay. And Professor Ataman also worked at SETA, SETA, SETA Foundation for Political, Economic, and Social Research. SETA is a think tank based in Ankara, and the one that published inside Turkey. At SETA, Professor Ataman served as the Director of Education and Social Policy. Oh, sorry. Foreign Policy Studies. Okay, so he's the Director of Foreign Policy Studies at SETA Foundation. Okay, if I also may note from the writings of Professor Ataman, he recently talked about the foreign policies in the United States and also the normalization between Turkey and the European Union. So perhaps that's the very basic background of Professor Ataman. And now the time and place are yours, Professor Ataman, to present about the strategy against terrorism. Please.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before the Jummah prayer, I didn't know how to greet you. Then, when everybody says Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, I think I had to be no exception. So sorry, since I don't know the audience, but Alhamdulillah, I know that I'm an Islamic country and a Muslim country. So there is no escape from me, unfortunately. I supposed to give the previous presentation yesterday. I live in Ankara, but I come from Istanbul. You know, the flight is between Jakarta and Istanbul. The flight between Ankara and Istanbul was cancelled, and I was not aware of it. When I went to the airport, they told me there is no flight. So I had to miss that flight. Therefore, now I have to give these two presentations in one day. The reason that we have postponed it was my reluctance, or the Turkish Airlines not informing me about the flight, the cancellation of the flight. So now I want to present the Turkish experience, the Turkish strategy against terrorism. Unfortunately, Turkey has been experiencing terrorism as a security threat for the last 4 decades, since mid-60s. Yeah, we can change the screen. Yeah, thank you very much. So during the Cold War, mainly it was leftist terrorist groups active in Turkey, but in reality, as an imminent, vital threat to Turkish territorial integrity and political independence, we have been struggling with terrorism since mid-1980s, when the PKK, a Kurdish Marxist-Leninist leftist secular organization among the Kurds, I have told you in the morning that the Kurds constitute the largest ethnic group in Turkey, but the majority of the Kurds, they want to be part of Turkey rather than to have a different and independent state. But this group, claiming that they are active, they are functioning in the name of the Kurds, they initiated this terrorist activities in the 1980s, when there was no rights, no cultural rights for the Kurds. But still, the method that they were using were terrorism, unfortunately. They were targeting civilians, innocent peoples. More than 40,000 innocent people, they have lost their lives during these attacks. And recently, maybe in the last several years, you may have heard from the media that PKK on the one hand and Daesh on the other, they executed, unfortunately, many terrorist activities in Turkey, ended in the loss of hundreds of individuals. You know, not to forget this, it's not the Western countries, but it is Turkey, the most imminent target of Daesh activities, unfortunately. So we are the most sufferers of Daesh activities. That is, terrorism still poses a vital threat to Turkish security. So we continue to struggle with these activities. So we don't have one front, we have several fronts, unfortunately. So we have religious-oriented terrorism, we have ideologically-oriented terrorism, we have ethnically-oriented terrorism. So mainly there are 3 kinds of terrorist organizations in Turkey. Therefore, Turkey has an experience of struggling, of
developing a counter-terrorism terrorism strategy. Today I will try to summarize this in 3 different contexts: at the national context, at the regional context, and at the global one. So what does Turkey do in order to cope with this threat? Yes, please. When we look at the national context, I don't see, okay. So, there are several instruments which was utilized by the Turkish state. One is democratization, another one is economic development, and the third one is military operations. So it's not easy to get rid of the sources. The convenient ground on which terrorists they emerge on. So the Turkish state, at least for the last 2 decades, I can say that they utilize democratization and economic development more than military operations. So, yes, the traditional response to any terrorist activities is military operation. But the Turkish government initiated the other 2 as a kind of complementary strategy in order to get rid of terrorism. One is democratization. Democratization means expansion of more room to underrepresented groups, to the poor, to the ethnic groups, but it's a kind of all-inclusive strategy to include everybody and to allow all groups to be represented in the parliament. Just I will give you some examples. For instance, today in the Turkish parliament, there is a political party which is closely associated with PKK. They are closely associated with the PKK, but still they are represented politically and they are in the parliament. So, until the AK Party rule, they were unable to form their political party. They had no political party. 7 of them, they were entering the parliament as independent members. But nowadays, they have their own political party and they are represented. There are thousands of associations, WAKF and associations active in Turkey. They have their own publishing houses, etc. So the maneuvering room is much more wider compared with the 1980s, with the 1990s. This helped quite a lot. As a result of this, the majority of the Kurds, they still stand with the AK Party, for instance. We have a multi-party political system, but when you look at the Kurdish regions, you will see that 2 political parties, they dominate. That is, they get the most votes. The first one is the PKK affiliated leftist party. It's Democratic Party, People's Democratic Party. The second one is AK Party. They divide almost all of the votes into 2. On the one side we have pro-PKK political party. On the other side we have AK Party. It was a result of these democratization processes. The second instrument is economic development. Unfortunately, until very recently, it was giving an excuse for PKK and PKK-minded groups, since there was no development, no political development in the Kurdish part of Turkey. So there was a kind of unbalanced economic development. On the western part of Turkey, it's much more similar to the European countries. The level of economic development is quite high, But on the eastern side of Turkey, it was closer to Iraq, but that is less developed, closer to Iran, less developed, etc. So the balance or the gap between the western part and the eastern part of Turkey was quite wide. But nowadays, it began to narrow. It's one of the biggest successes of AK Party governments. Then they began to invest more in the Kurdish parts of the country. And nowadays, they enjoy to use modern roads, airports, universities. In every sphere of life, you can witness huge, a dramatic increase in the level of economic development in the eastern part of Turkey. That is, the cities in which the Kurds constitute the majority, they have their own universities in which the Kurdish literature, the Kurdish history, etc. is taught in Kurdish. They have Kurdish departments, etc. They have airports, as I've said. They have huge shopping centers, shopping malls. They have everything that we used to have in the western part. They are transferred to the east as well. That is, the gap is much more narrower compared with the past. So economic development was an instrument. You know, when you direct people, especially the youth, to attend universities, to get their education, to be able to have jobs, significant jobs, not only in the eastern part, but in the western part of Turkey. So it makes difficult for the PKK or any other terrorist organization to recruit militants. So nowadays, for instance, recruitment rate is almost zero in Turkey for the PKK. And they are recruit the Kurds from Syria, from Iraq, and the diaspora in Europe. But those who live in Turkey, the recruitment rate is almost zero. Nobody wants to participate PKK as a militant anymore. I think this by itself shows the success of this strategy. And the military operations. I will tell you two things about military operations. Unfortunately, it was dependence of the Turkish security forces on others, in quotation mark. Therefore, it was unable to struggle against PKK or any other terrorist organization. The first thing is intelligence sharing. Turkey was getting intelligence from other sources, external sources, from the United States, from Israel, etc., etc. You know, Israel was the main provider of unmanned aerial vehicles. Unfortunately, we are buying Heron, they are the brand name of Israeli unmanned aerial vehicles. They were the ones which gathering information, getting intelligence information from the ground. But they were sharing this information with the PKK organization. So they were aware what the Turkish army will do, what will be the next move against them. And other Western countries, unfortunately, they were also got involved. They have their hands within the question. So this was one of the defenders. Nowadays, as I've said early in the morning, Turkey began to produce its own unmanned vehicles and armed unmanned vehicles. That is, on the computer, they sent the vehicle to the mountainous areas, and they hit the terrorist targets without any harm to any individual, any soldier whatsoever. So Turkey is not now much more efficient with the technological development. We used to buy even bullets from the outside. But as I've said again, the military procurement, the national procurement is provided by the Turkish, by the national production, about 60% of the total. So we are much more independent now. We use our own resources in the struggle against terrorism. Second one was the FETÖ, unfortunately. Almost 40% of Turkish generals were belonging to this secret organization. And they were not doing what they were expected to do. They were working with them. They were cooperating on the ground, unfortunately. Nowadays, you know, we got rid of them, all of them, almost all of them. There are still some secret entities, unfortunately, it's claimed in the army. But the majority of them, they were exported from the army. Some of them, they went to outside of Turkey. Now we have still a more efficient one. You know, experience on the ground is very significant. As I've said, experiencing for 40 years of struggle against terrorism. It means a lot. So some countries, for instance, like Germany and some other countries, they don't have such an experience on the ground. So Turkey, the Turkish army in this sense, is quite, it has the capacity and the capability to struggle against terrorist organizations. Therefore it was the third factor that I have just mentioned. Turkey now is able to control its own borders. As you see on the screen, more than 5,000 terror suspects were exported from Turkey. And more than 50,000 of them, they were prevented of entering Turkey. And unfortunately, many terrorists who bombed European capitals, they were informed, the Western countries, they were informed by the Turkish security forces to be prevented, but they even didn't listen to Turkish warnings. That's why at the end they have these terrorist activities, operations in Europe. Next please. At the regional context, you know, it's about border. It's about Turkish relations with Iraq and with Syria. You know, the headquarters of the PKK organization is in northern Iraq. It's inside of the Iraqi state. It's not in Turkey. And unfortunately, the Iraqi state is unable to prevent those terrorist groups attacking Turkey. Therefore, Turkey and Iraq, they have signed an agreement allowing Turkey to bomb their headquarters. So even nowadays, the Turkish army has been controlling about 30-40 kilometers in depth inside of the Iraq. You know, they are trying to prevent terrorist activities not inside of Turkey, but beyond the borders, beyond the Turkish borders. And Turkey has military bases in northern Iraq, in northern Syria. So the main target in Iraq is the PKK and the PKK affiliated small organizations. The main target is to disable terrorist organizations and to eradicate their capability, their capacity not to attack, in order not to attack Turkey. I have mentioned two operations. One was Operation Euphrates Shield. It was directed against Daesh and it eliminated Daesh. I think the Turkish security forces killed about 3,000 Daesh militants during the operation. So they were at the border. They were at the border, at the Turkish border, with their own flags. So they were controlling the area. Nowadays, it is the Syrian opposition. The second is the military operation, which we call it Operation Olive Branch. It was on the northwest part of Syria. It was directed against YPG-PYD, which is an offshoot of PKK active in Turkey. So there again, after the elimination of YPG troops, the area was left to the Syrian opposition. So Turkey does not control the region. It controls, Turkey controls or protects those who control the region. Okay, so there is no direct control by Turkey. Therefore, the last point is quite significant. I think it's the unique Turkish contribution to the eradication of terrorist activities in Syria. There is no comparable activities, unfortunately. Turkey has initiated a multi-dimensional cooperation, construction in the Syrian parts in order to struggle against terrorism. First, it provided security for those who live there. Second, Turkey provided humanitarian relief. Turkey provided an environment, a suitable environment for education. Turkey provided health facilities. Turkey constructed not only schools, but hospitals. Now, dozens of Syrian and Turkish doctors, physicians, they work in the Syrian part of the country. Turkey opened some other facilities. For instance, branches of banks, etc. So, to make life easier for the people, civilians live there. That is, Turkey prioritizes construction, reconstruction of the state. I think nowadays, at least, Turkey does two main things. First, Turkey prevents innocent civilians to get killed by the Assad regime and by the Iranian militias, etc. On the other hand, Turkey facilitates their social lives. So this is a kind of unique contribution. You know, there are no Westerners active in Syria on the ground. There is no Russians, no Iranians. Unfortunately, Iranians, they have been supporting the other side. And there is no Muslim country, by the way, with the exception of Qatar, a tiny small state, contributing to the Turkish efforts, but this is the only one. Saudi Arabia, interestingly enough, they have been supporting PKK units in Syria, in parallel line with the United States. You know, Trump asked them to contribute. Just 2 weeks ago, they promised to send $200 million to PKK. So unfortunately, they have been contributing to the, it's not easy to say, bloodshed, unfortunately, in Syria. So this is why Turkey feels alone in its struggle against terrorism in Syria. The main difference in the global context, I will come to there. On the Syrian ground, Turkey calls all other actors, global and regional actors, to be honest in their struggle against terrorism. Let's say there mustn't be one exception. If you struggle against terrorism, let's struggle against all terrorist groups at once. But if you struggle against one terrorist group by supporting another, it's not an honest struggle. So it's not a struggle against terrorism. It's a struggle against those who serve the interests of some others. You know, we all know that terrorist groups are exploited by big powers. utilize them, they exploit their existence on the ground. When you ask Americans, for instance, their closest ally is the PKK in Syria. But Turkey, the Turkish state has offered, told the Americans that if you need any assistance on the ground in Syria, we and our Syrian opposition allies, we are here and we want to support you against your struggle against Daesh. But they refused, they declined the offer. They prefer to work with the PKK and affiliated organizations instead of Turkey and the Syrian opposition forces, unfortunately. So, we come to the last context, the global context. Okay, so I have put several principles here. The first one, Turkey actively participates in all United Nations counter-terrorism efforts and bodies, institutions, platforms, whatever they have, whatever the UN has, Turkey is part of it. And one of the forerunners, because one of the most suffered against terrorism, Turkey is one of the biggest, the largest contributors of this. Turkey has been playing a major role in all global platforms established to fight against terrorism. So, we are no exception, and we want to contribute. The second significant principle is to mention, Turkey is member of main international platforms, struggling, but regional one, not the global one. Regional international platforms established by European countries. Turkey has been working, cooperating with European countries for a long time, since the beginning. You know, Turkey deported terrorists who are who were active in European countries. And Turkey, you know, with the demand of the European countries, they spent more money, invest in security forces in order to prevent further illegal migration to European countries. So Turkey still contributes to the security of Europe. Therefore, even though they are not keen on Turkey, they don't support Turkish full membership in the European Union, they want Turkey to be supported because Turkey is the gatekeeper. Turkey is the gatekeeper for the European security. Even, you know, those xenophobic leaders, they want Turkey to be supported because of its role and its location, geostrategic, geopolitical location. And Turkey contributes to the Eurasian efforts and platforms as well, to the Eurasian that is established by Russians. And Turkey wants, Turkey has been trying to prevent the demographic changes, not only in the west-east direction, but also in the north-south direction. That is prevent Russian citizens to go to Syria and to the Middle East to get politicized, etc. So Turkey has been cooperating with Central Asian countries, with Middle Eastern countries overall. And the third one, Turkey provides substantial support to the international community in the fight against terrorism. For instance, as you see at the last, Turkey provides diplomatic support. Turkey shares intelligence with all states, irrespective of their ideological, ethnic background, etc. Turkey sent troops in order to contribute to the struggle against terrorism. You know, whether it's just or unjust, I'm just trying to mention what's going on in the world. Turkey has sent troops to Afghanistan. To do what? to support Americans in their fight against Daesh or Al-Qaeda or Taliban whatsoever. Turkey has sent a military unit to Afghanistan, responding to American calls. You know, it was in the context of NATO. So Turkey, at least, shows its good intention to the Westerns. And Turkey has sent military troops to Somalia, to Kosovo, to Bosnia-Herzegovina, to Azerbaijan. This is not supported by the West, by the way. You know, it's kind of national perspective and vision. So Turkey has had even troops in Libya until very recently. So we had to withdraw, unfortunately. We have sent troops to Sudan, to Somalia, to Qatar. Probably if it was not the Turkish troop in Qatar, Saudis and Emiratis would lead an overthrow of the government in Qatar. So Turkey was there as a deterrent power. Contribution to sending troops. And Turkey, maybe the most important, one of the most important points, provide access to other states to use its military bases in their operations against terrorist groups. What do I mean by this? Turkey provides access to Turkish military bases in Turkey for the use of Americans, the British, French, Germans, Russians, Saudis, by the way, in the past, Emiratis, whoever they are, whoever came to the region in order to fight against Daesh, Turkey provided its military bases. So, but Turkey, in the early days, unfortunately, didn't want to contribute these operations militarily. Since Turkey is the most vulnerable country against during this process. You know, the United States is not a regional country. You have to go to the United States in order to be able to execute a military terrorist activity. So, and it's very rare, it's exceptional. You know, after September 11 terrorist attacks, it was the Boston terrorist attacks. So there's a few terrorist activities in the United States. So they are not direct threat and target. But Turkey has been sharing about 1,000 kilometers with Syria. How will you control this? It's almost impossible. So at the end, we had, unfortunately, terrorist operations in Istanbul, in Ankara, in some other cities of Turkey. So it's difficult. That's why Turkey tried not to be target of the ISIS attacks. Therefore, in the early days, it didn't participate to the military operations. And therefore, misperception, misinformation came later on. But as you see, all this, I think, shows the Turkish global strategy against terrorist activities. Yes, please, the last one. And at the end, talking about terrorism is not easy. Because somebody else's terrorist is somebody else's hero or freedom fighters, independence seekers, etc. There is no consensus on the definition of terrorism and terrorism. Therefore, for instance, the United States does not want to recognize YPG as a terrorist organization. But the United States does accept PKK as a terrorist organization. Look at the picture now. the United States recognized PKK as a terrorist organization. All Americans, they know that YPG is part of PKK, but they do not consider YPG as a terrorist organization. Because if they recognize YPG as a terrorist organization, it's unconstitutional, it's illegal to support. So when they support a terrorist organization, which is recognized by the state, it requires punishment in American domestic politics. Therefore, they decide not to declare this as a terrorist organization. But the reality shows who they are and what it is. So it's difficult. There is no common threat perception. If you ask Iran, for instance, Iranians also directly, unfortunately, support PKK in Syria and in Iraq, or the Assad regime, or some other countries. So at the end, Western countries, unfortunately, they do not support Turkey's struggle against terrorism. They, members, active members of PKK, FETÖ, Daesh, whoever they are freely living in European countries. Don't think that they are struggling against terrorism outside of the Western world, but not inside of the West. So they live freely in many European countries, unfortunately. As long as they don't cross the red line for their national interests or their sensitivities. So if you are against Turkey or any other non-Western country, it's okay. When it comes to Catalans, for instance, it's illegal to have a referendum. But when it comes for the Kurds living in Iraq, it becomes a must, a necessity. So what's the difference between the Kurds living in Iraq and Catalans living in Spain? Nothing. The whole European countries, they punish the Catalans because of this attempt to have a referendum, to hold a referendum, maybe to be an independent state in Europe. And one last thing, which is very significant. Unfortunately, failed states serve as one of the main sources, main grounds for the recruitment of terrorists, of militants worldwide. And unfortunately, after the Arab insurgencies, after the so-called Arab Spring, we have too many failed states in the Middle East. Next to us, Syria is a failed state. Until very recently, just yesterday, the Prime Minister was able to get approval from the parliament in Iraq, but still it's half failed state. Yemen is a failed state. Libya is a failed state. Lebanon is a failed state. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to prevent demographic changes or recruitment of the terrorists. Or the most important one, it makes it impossible to prevent political radicalization, which leads to the establishment of terrorist groups. The result is Daesh, the result is Hashd Shabi, the result is PKK, YPG, whatever you call it. So all this were able to flourish, to emerge in the failed states, as in the Somalian case and many others. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Big applause once again to Professor Tema. Thank you, Professor. Very interesting presentation from you. Very large, and yet has explained about the strategies which have been implemented by Turkey. Okay, so if I may summarize a bit, I like the statement that you said that terrorism is actually representing the bigger power or bigger interest. Where I know that you also wrote in your writings based on the Sabah that you said YPG is actually supported by the US themselves in terms of financial support and also weapons and military training. That's very interesting. Where it reminds me what have been conducted by this nation, Turkey, has been in line with Jones and Levitsky book, where they say continuous repression and military act from the government, and also unpopularity of militant group or terrorist organization will be signaling the end of terrorism itself. And what Turkey has conducted so far in terms of nationally, like you have presented before, Turkey has transformed massively for the country itself. It has narrowed the gap by doing more investment in the Kurds part of the country, where no one wants to be militant of PKK anymore. That's also in line with Joseph Levitsky book, and where Turkey itself has been very efficient and started to be an independent resource, reflected by the production of unmanned vehicles, which in the past Turkey was supported by the Israelis and the US. The other thing is, which I note that in terms of regional, Turkey has also support and helped the multi-dimensional construction in Syria, and where Turkey's military operation has also expanded and covering the region of the Middle East as well as global region. So that's the summary, a little bit summary of what has been presented by Professor Ataman. Please correct me if I have any mistakes for it. So it started to be a very interesting topic, and now let's fire it up again with the questions from the audience here. One questions, I limited it into 5 minutes, if possible. And please, the gentleman over there with the nice black suit, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Mahiti, for your insightful presentations about the term of terrorism in the Middle East, especially Turkey and surrounding countries. You mentioned that there is no such consensus of the definitions of terrorism. In the global environment, that is United Nations Conventions Against the Transnational Organized Crime, one hand. And in the other hand, there is United Nations Conventions to protect sovereign country. You mentioned that Turkey launched attacks against the territory within Iraq, 30 or 40 kilometers away from Turkey, within Iraq, to attack the Turkish belief as a stronghold of the terrorist organizations. It is not against the sovereign country as protected by the United Nations Conventions, which was done also by Iraq in 1991 against Kuwait, and Kuwait came to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia came to the United States, and that led to the Gulf War, the first. That is the history of the Gulf War in 1991, 1992. That is because of the expansion of Iraq against Kuwait, and Kuwait call upon the Saudi ruler, and Saudi ruler call upon the United States, and United States play into the United Nations until the United Nations issued United not convention resolution number 600 to start the Gulf War at the time. I often if Turkey does the same as Iraq did against Kuwait, that there is a reason for Iraq or for whoever to attack Turkey and become the birth of another resolutions in the United Nations to attack Turkey from the NATO organization. I don't know, because Turkey is also part of the NATO. My question is that not against the United Nations conventions to protect the sovereign country, what Turkey has done to attack the strongholds as Turkey's belief as the stronghold of the terrorist organizations, while there is no consensus of the definition of terrorists. Thank you.
Okay, one question at a time, so thank you.
Yeah, we go one by one. Is it against sovereignty of Iraq, the Turkish activities? There are two things to mention. The first one is Turkey has signed an agreement with the Iraqi state in the early 80s to be able to intervene strongholds of terrorists inside of Iraq. So there is a bilateral agreement between Turkey and Iraq. But the most importantly, we all know that the United Nations Charter, Article 51, arranges self-defense, legitimate self-defense. So none of the international rules or principles prevents a country to defend its territorial integrity and political independence against any external threats. So Turkey is not there. Turkey doesn't claim that it will remain in Iraq. Turkey doesn't claim that it wants a part of Iraq or invaded or annexed it. There is no such thing. Turkey is there in order to be able to defend itself against terrorist attacks. So it's part of it. That's why it's legal and legitimate to defend itself against a terrorist organization. And Turkey is not the only one, by the way. For instance, the Iranian state has been attacking the same geography quite often. Just 2 months ago, 2 months ago, they hit several targets. So Turkey is not the only one. Or the same as Americans does in Syria. They consider Daesh as an enemy, and they come and they hit Daesh in Syria. And this is a kind of general practice, I think. Thank you.
Okay, another question. Name and faculty and which university? Please start.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hanan. I think it's very interesting to see your three conclusions. Number one is the definition of terrorism. Number two is, because of this understanding, some countries support and some countries fight terrorism. It depends on the definition. And the third is failed states. My question is, come to think about it, actually, if there is no country's issue of prosperity, there's no fight. And so, there's no definition of terrorism. Okay? And also, there's no war. I think we have to think about how much money and resources has been used in the war strategy as opposed to peace approach. I don't know if somebody has studied this, but this is actually an old issue. So I think that's really our challenge now, because the root cause, I think, is people prosperity. We just may not let people anywhere in the world get such, desperate for good things. Thank you.
We collect the question first. Another question, please. From this side, Pak, with the glasses. The gray shirt. The gray shirt. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Idrus. I want to ask you geopolitical questions. So, given the fact that there is a newly established alliance called Business Alliance between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And from this fact, what do you think the near future relations between Western countries and Saudi Arabia after Khashoggi's killing? Simple.
Okay. Another one from Pak with the glasses on the green shirt first, and then the lady with the pink. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Tema. I'm from Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies. I've got a questions basically regarding the, you said in almost the end of the presentation about terrorist recruitments. But here, I would like to ask that there are several cases where Indonesian participated in ISIS but came through Turkey. And returned to Indonesia also came from Turkey as an extremist, and then they probably came here as an extremist, but they went there through Turkey and then went back also from Turkey. I would like to know that how the Turkish government handle such case. So instead of probably you have talked a lot about Turkish, but how about another nationalities but used Turkeys as their path? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last question from the lady.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Bunga. I'm from the Terrorism Study Program in this university. My research currently is about the women and terrorism. As you may be aware that the number of women's engagement in terrorism activities is increasing. In my opinion, maybe this because the effect of the expansion of terrorism networking. So, like in Indonesia, as may you heard that, there is a change of the dynamics changing in the actor of the terrorism. Like women before was only the supporter of the terrorism, but currently is the actor of the terrorism itself. So, how do you see this phenomenon in the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions. Okay. Hold. Maybe from the second question,
Okay, thank you.
the definition of the terrorism
can reach a universal definition by mentioning two parameters. The first one is targeting civilians. The second one is a political purpose. So any targeting civilian for political purposes is terrorism, whoever they are. It can be a state or a terrorist organization, a non-state actor, whoever it is, it doesn't matter. So these two points are the most important. So it's not too much difficult if political actors behave honestly. The problem is a political issue, so they always bend these definitions. The ground is very flexible, so you cannot catch a state in this sense. They always exploit this for political purposes. I agree with you that prosperity, therefore I have put economic development as one of the main way of preventing recruitment of terrorists and militants. But the reason is the failure of states. Most of the time, it's not because of the lack of prosperity. It's political. You know, Libya is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of oil resources. But nowadays, it's one of the most dangerous states to live in. There is no political authority, no security whatsoever. We are talking about Libya. But on the other hand, we have Yemen, which is a poor country. So prosperity is not always the answer, or the lack of prosperity is not the answer for the failed state or the recruitment of terrorism. It's one of the significant parameters. It is quite important, but it's not the only one. So political frictions, ideologies, other expectations play a role, I think. Even sectarianism, you know, in many Middle Eastern countries play a role. About the USA, Saudi Arabia, Israeli question, yes, this is one of the greatest implications of the Khashoggi murder, unfortunately. You know, Trump administration, since the beginning, they have been trying to protect Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. There is a difference between, a political difference between that of the king and his son, Crown Prince. Crown Prince, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia and the one in the Emirates, on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the Israeli state and Jared Kushner, you know, the son-in-law of Trump. They had established a kind of alliance in the Middle East. They have been trying to establish an Arab NATO, in order to be able to control the opposition, whatever they are and whoever they are. So the greatest opposition for this bloc is Iran. But one of the opposition countries and need to be constrained is Turkey, unfortunately. Since Turkey, this group has already unilaterally authorized Turkey. What will be the future? I think the Khashoggi case, at least it will postpone this establishment, if not prevent. It will postpone the establishment of the Arab NATO. So from now on, for the Trump administration, it will be very difficult to support this Crown Prince, since it was clear that this was behind this murder, unfortunately, in the consulate. We all know that there is no democracy in Saudi Arabia, so he is the one man, the only man who is able to make any projects, any political projects, unfortunately. So it will be very difficult for the Saudi side to escape, to escape from these claims. This is my personal observation.
So the future of Saudis and Western relations in terms of individual politics, it will change. But in state-to-state relations, it will continue. It will go on. Since Saudi Arabia is a dependent country, unfortunately. You remember the saying of Donald Trump when during a political campaign in the United States, he said, if I don't support Saudi Arabia, he cannot remain in power for 2 weeks. This was an unfortunate sentence for the Saudi politics. That the Saudis are dependent on the United States, if not Trump. So it will be difficult for them to support. About the route, about the foreign nationals in Turkey, most of the time, unfortunately, other countries, they do not share intelligence with Turkey. I have mentioned this. So when Turkey doesn't know who is terrorist, who is suspect, who is not, it's open to everyone, like any other state, unfortunately. So we are unable, if we don't have records of the individual, we are unable to take necessary measures, unfortunately. And we know that some of the foreign nationals, they executed terrorist operations inside of Turkey. The one who blew Reyna, one of the entertainment places in Istanbul, most of them, they were not Turkish nationalities. They were foreigners. I mean, they were Russian citizens, Chinese citizens, Kyrgyzstan citizens, etc. So they pose a threat, direct threat, even to us. So they use Turkey, unfortunately, as a kind of crossing place to go to Syria and to go to Iraq and get radicalized, politicized, etc. So if other states, they don't share intelligence with Turkey, for us it's impossible to prevent these crossings. The last one, about the women and terrorism. Yeah, for one thing, I know that they used to be the target of terrorism, since women represents innocence overall. But recently, the picture began to change. They began to actively participate, unfortunately, in terrorist operations. For the secularists, it's not a new concept, by the way. For instance, some female PKK militants in Turkey, they were blowing up themselves in some public places and killing dozens of individuals with themselves, unfortunately. So secular groups, they are accustomed to it. The new thing is religious groups began to recruit women as militants, unfortunately. We have faced several attacks, unfortunately, from women inside of Turkey and in some other places as well. So this is a kind of supra-gender issue. So it's not an issue to be analyzed from an androcentric perspective. Okay, so it will be increasingly so a supra-gender issue. Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Big applause for Professor Ataman and big applause for all of us here for
yeah, thank you very much for your patience to listen to an individual for so long. Sorry for that, by the way.
Okay, so Professor Ataman has definitely given his experience and Turkey's experience in the strategy to fight against terrorism, and that's why Turkey has become one of the most powerful nations in the Eurasian and the Middle Eastern region, if I may say that. Thank you very much, Professor Ataman.
To you also.
And also for the audience here, and Pak Muhammad Lutfi and Pak Muhammad Syauqi. Thank you very much. Once again, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
much for the speakers, Mr. Muhyiddin Ataman and also Mr. Gagari Walanda for the insightful presentation. This time I would like to call Mr. Muhyiddin Ataman to receive the souvenirs. Kindly please Dr. Muhammad Lutfi Zudi, the Director of School of Stratejik and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia, to pass on the souvenirs from the second ICSGS 2018 to our honorable presenting speaker on the stage.
I will be honored to expose this in one room. Thank you very much. So, I will get the first in the Indonesian and Turkish. It's too much.
Dua di atasnya dulu.
Tumpuk benar Mbak.
Ladies and gentlemen, those are the agendas we have presented to you today. As we have finished our last plenary session, we are heading to the end of our event. It is now the time for a summary presentation from our head of organizing committee, Dr. Mia Siskawati, of the entire panel and poster presentation. Dr. Mia Siskawati will announce the best presenter and also the best poster of the second International Conference of Stratejik and Global Studies. Ibu Mia, time is yours. Saya umumkan ini Pak.
Oh ya, ya. Untuk makin industri of
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me, Mia Siskawati, I'm the chairperson of the organizing committee, to report the 3 days processes of the International Conference on Strategic and Global Studies. So during the 3 days, we all, the speakers, keynote speakers, the resource persons, the presenters, as well as guests and other participants, we have had opportunity to explore several topics that relate to the main theme of this conference: gender, urban space, and global circulation. This is the conference that provided us an arena for exploration for conceptual ideas and critical examination of relevant issues. And we are grateful to have keynote speakers as well as resource persons to discuss the topics on the resilient and sustainable cities towards gender equality, safe space, inclusive urban space, as well as the politics of multi-level policies of sustainable development we learned from Turkey, from Dr. Muhyiddin Aman today. And we have 3 clusters of the parallel panel discussion. Cluster A is urbanization, sustainability, and resiliency. The cluster A has 3 panels. Panel 1, gender, urbanization, and global migration. Panel 2, urban space and sustainable urban environment. Panel 3, urban disaster and community resilience. The cluster B is about social equity, inclusion, and global urban security. So today, discussion led by Dr. Muhyiddin is actually part of enrichment for this panel, this cluster. And this cluster has several panels. So panel 4 is gender, violence, and urban space. Panel 5, inclusive urban space, justice, and peace. Panel 6, conflict, crime, terror, and urban space, including terrorism. Panel 7, space, gender, and public health disparities. And then the last cluster is about everyday practices and global urban common. It has several panels. Panel 8 is everyday practices of gender and spaces. Panel 9, spatial exposition of memory. Panel 10, urban life and digital technology. Panel 11, urban art and creative practices. And panel 12, gender, space, and social movements. So a lot of panels, but all of the panels, I'd like to report that all the presenters have received positive comments to improve their papers. Most of the presenters are graduates from the 9 program studies within the scope of the School of Strategic and Global Studies. And we will be working together to improve the papers so that the papers could be published. And to close my report, as the chairperson of the advancing committee, I'd like to mention the best presenter of the 2nd International Conference on Strategic and Global Studies. And the nomination was made by each moderator of each panel, and each moderator is a faculty member of the program studies under the scope of the School of Strategic and Global Studies. So the best presenter of the 2nd International Conference on Strategic and Global Studies is Ms. Fitria Sari. She is from Gender Studies. The title of her paper is Voices from Wives of Ex-Terrorism Prisoner. So in between rebelling, accepting extremism, ideological in household relationship, case study at Saharjo, Solo, Central Java. So to Ms. Fitria Sari, I'd like to invite you. Okay, and then the best poster paper, so because we also have poster paper, the best poster paper for the 2nd International Conference on Strategic and Global Studies is Ms. Bunga Anggia Prameswari. And the title of her poster paper is Indonesian Women Engagement in Terrorism Activities, the Threat to Cross-Bordering to the Philippines. Ms. Bunga Anggia. And I'd like to invite Dr. Muhammad Lutfi, as the director of the School of Strategic and Global Studies, to deliver the token of appreciation. teamwork. The organization of a conference like this conference is very much a team effort. So I'd like to thank all the members of the steering committee, led by Dr. Muhammad Lutfi as the director of the School of Stratejik and Global Studies, also all members of the organizing committee, and also I wish to thank all the presenters, the poster paper authors, as well as the guests and participants of this conference. Last but not least, I'd like to again to apologize for all mistakes as well as all uncomfortable probably feelings or inconveniences due to probably all the technical issues that we have as an organization. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Now it is time for closing speech, and the closing speech is to be delivered by the Director of School of Stratejik and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia, host of the organizing committee of this event, Dr. Muhammad Lutfi.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished speakers, guys, participants of the second conference of Stratejik and Global Studies on Gender, Urban Space and Global Circulation, organized by our School of Stratejik and Global Studies. On behalf of University of Indonesia, organizer and sponsor of this conference, it is indeed my pleasure to make a few closing remarks and express gratitude to all those who made this event as a reality. At this conference, we received more than 200 abstracts. After passing process of review, the results are 221 abstracts. In this conference, there are 221 participants. From that number, 78 of them are presenters and 25 of them are poster presentation. Based on the background of participants, 146 from University of Indonesia, while 75 of them from outside University of Indonesia. They come from different cities and countries. And the last 3 days, we were very fortunate to listen and hear the insight from Dr. Wicaksono Saroso from Dewan Eksekutif Kemitraan Habitat, Professor Bu Chanda from Macedon City, Thailand, Professor Muhyiddin Ataman from Ankara State, Professor Jin Yakub from National University of Singapore. A conference became a success only if participants arrive. They are the lifeblood of a conference. Thus, we do express our sincere thanks to all of you who have come from different cities and countries. We do thank you for being interested in our conference. It is my sincere duty to thank all of you here today to enjoy your stay here in Jakarta. Once back, if you are present environment, use the concept that you have learned in this conference to contribute society and make this a better place for all. Hopefully, we can meet and discuss of the next ICSGS. See you on the next year. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies ladies and gentlemen, now we have reached the end of the event. Thank you so much for the presenters, participants for attending the second ICSGS 2018. I will leave Narazuga. See you in the next event. Thank you and have a great day.
Ada yang mati ya? Suara Nara nggak kedengeran di belakang, ini mati ya?
Hidup?
Hidup?
Hidup
bukan ya? Aku di situ, kurang keras.
Pakai saya pasang.
Sekali lagi Bapak-Bapak dan Ibu-Ibu sekalian, boleh disilakan ke depan